This is what the rules about cannabis force people to do, is do crazy things like this just because they can't show the plant on this channel. Hi friend, it's H here, your plant training expert, and today we're going to be doing another bud review where we get the most popular plant training videos on the internet and we talk about whether they're fact or fiction. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hi friends, it's H here, and today I'm super excited for another bud review. Today we're going to be reviewing Pigeons 420, has got 100,000 subscribers, and the video is 2 training techniques for massive harvests. Well, let's see if these techniques actually do yield massive harvests. So without further ado, let's get going.
I'm on the cusp of one of the biggest, greatest harvests of my entire career. I was trying to think of a better, bigger one, and in fact, this is it. I've filled an entire 4x4 tent with one plant. As a matter of fact, you can check it out on my Instagram, where I kept everybody up to date the entire time. I can't post videos here about it because, well, YouTube doesn't like the plant content. But let me tell you, I think that there are only 2 training techniques that you need to utilize anytime you are growing this wonderful plant. YouTube really doesn't like when we show plant content on their platform. And I thought, how am I going to describe how to train these plants? And I thought, wait a second, interpretive dance. What better way to speak to people than through dance? So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Today we're going to talk about training. And let's head on out into the field so I can give you the best demonstration you've ever seen. The first technique is lollipopping. You're going to want to remove the bottom portions of the plant as this plant progresses.
This is what the rules about cannabis force people to do, is do crazy things like this just because they can't show the plant on this channel.
Through the vegetative stage so that you can try to train the tops that are going to be the ones that are going to bear the big, heavy fruit.
Now, I just want to stop here real quick, and I want to agree with him with Pigeons 420 that lollipop is a great technique. However, you don't want to necessarily be lollipopping your plant during the vegetative stage, because during the vegetative stage is when you're putting on as much biomass as you can in order to support those buds later on. Lollipopping comes in extremely handy after the 3rd week of flowering, once your plant has stopped putting on growth and now is putting on thickness. So you remove those leaves so that it allows the top buds to get even thicker and not form that popcorn bud at the very bottom.
Start to remove the low-lying branches, the ones that are just going to get in the way of these bigger plants, ones that are essentially not going to be able to soak up the light that's going to get blocked by the canopy. So go ahead and remove the bottom portions of the plant. I like to think of this as almost like the thirds to 2/3 rule. I like to remove either the bottom third or 2/3 to maintain a big, heavy canopy.
This is a rule that may work on depending on the size of the plant. However, it's hard for a new grower, for someone who is trying to apply the lollipopping technique, to understand like what is really a third, or a third to 2/3 is a big difference there. What we really recommend when lollipopping the plant, which is, as he described here, removing that bottom growth to let the top get most of that energy. What we recommend is leaving 8 to 12 inches of foliage at the very top and then defoliating and pruning everything below that. By focusing on that top 8 to 12 inches, you're going to get buds that are 8 to 12 inches in length, and they are as thick and potent as they can possibly be.
Let the light soak up across all the buds, right? But not the bottom ones. Just remove those. And then that way you're not only going to be able to maximize the bud growth, you're also going to be able to ensure that you're not going to create a habitat that's going to be beneficial to bugs. Bugs are going to be one of those things that sneak up on you at the end of your grow, or, you know, worst cases, they show up towards the middle and you have to try to deal with them, or you lose the entire crop. I do find lollipopping your plants minimizes the exposure to bugs and allows for the light to take up as much of that top canopy as possible, and it doesn't have to worry about the light doesn't have to worry about penetrating through the canopy to get to those lower lying buds. I lollipop all of my plants, and I think
so. Again, with the lollipopping technique, this is right. You don't want to waste your light on those lower buds that are not going to catch much of it, because otherwise they're going to turn into popcorn. So this is absolutely correct. What in the vegetative stage, however, lollipopping your plant too much is going to force that growth to go to the top, but it's also going to remove a lot of potential energy that could have turned out to be good branches. So we don't recommend doing this again in the vegetative stage. You let your plant grow during the vegetative stage. You can do some selective pruning defoliating, which is a different technique, but the lollipopping itself is much better done after the flower stage has set.
I think you should too. The second technique that I think is underutilized and as important is the idea of bending your plants over. I'm a strong believer that you do not need to top your plants. So the idea of either topping or mainlining is out for me because I don't think it's necessary. I much rather bend the plant over, have it exposed horizontally to the light so that all those bud sites have an equal opportunity to soak up the light and energy. Just bend them over. Give those branches a little bit of a twist. Every branch should get a little bit of your attention. So make sure that you're twisting every branch, you're bending.
Number one, there's absolutely nothing wrong with topping. It's actually a great technique when done right. And in fact, it helps expose your plant to a lot more light and airflow as is being mentioned here. However, if you have an out of flower, for example, where topping is not so recommended because it does stunt your plant for about 1 to 2 days, using the bending technique, the low stress training technique, where you simply bend your main stalk to the side, is then your best choice. So this here, I would say top your plant if it's a photo period, bend your plant, low stress train your plant if it's an out of flower. But with the topping, you're also going to be doing the bending. You're just not going to be bending that main stalk. You're going to be bending the branches that come off the main stalk after you do your topping. The other thing is that twisting of the branches is, I would call that bro science. I would not do that to my branches at all. It's only going to stress them. They're not going to understand what's going on. They will think that there's something trying to attack them, which will add some unnecessary stress. Just the fact that you're bending your branches is already stressing them enough. So I will not personally recommend you do the twisting of the branches. That's the first time I've ever heard about this.
Because not only is this going to allow it to spread outwards to cover the entire tent or the entire surface area, it's also going to allow these stems to get big and strong so that they can bear the fruit of these big, heavy buds. I'm a strong believer in giving every single top a little bit of attention. This way, you know that it's going to be able to handle the heavy weight of the bud. We've all been there. We've had those buds that tip over sideways later and later into flower because they weren't supported by a good, solid stem. So twist.
The reason why your buds will fall over during the flower stage is, of course, they're getting too heavy, but that means you overtrained your plant and you didn't provide it, say, a trellis net to help support the weight of those buds. Again, the twisting may work for that purpose. However, it's not going to be something that your plant likes. It might actually end up affecting your final yield. If your buds are starting to fall over and starting to collapse because they're too heavy, you can always use a garden tie and tie one branch to the other so that if two branches are falling over, you can bring them both back to the center, almost like what a tomato cage does, which is holding everything together by those wires.
The pigeon twist. Give it a little twist in your fingers. Every branch should get a little bit of attention, and that includes the main stalk. That main stalk is often going to want to bounce back up from you, but you got to be able to bend it back down, that way that it can stay horizontal. That plant is going to fight you to come back upwards, and that fight is actually what's going to make it stronger as it progresses through the veg stage. Between using these two techniques of lollipopping and bending, you don't need to use any other technique to maximize your space. Anything else?
You could very well get away with bending and lollipopping. One thing to note here is that when you do the bending, it's going to be something you do during the veg stage, and the lollipopping, as we recommended, during the flowering stage. Those two techniques, they can go well together. However, we don't recommend just doing those two because during the veg stage, it is also important to defoliate, but you don't want to be doing the lollipop during the veg stage because it's going to stress the plant too much and you're going to be killing what could be potentially good growth. You want to be lollipopping in the flowering stage. So you don't want to skip that veg stage defoliation. Then you have your bending. The bending is most useful during the veg stage, but bending plus topping yields the best results, especially on photo periods. So if you're growing out of flowers, you can very much get away with only the bending, but then you don't want to do the lollipopping because that's going to really stress your out of flower. So don't use bending plus lollipopping on an out of flower. If you're growing photo periods, instead of just doing bending and lollipopping, you can do topping plus bending plus veg stage defoliation plus the lollipopping after the flowering stage, at which point you should also be supporting your buds with a trellis net or with a garden tie that keeps everything together so you don't end up with those flimsy buds that ended up to the sides. The twisty technique, as far as I'm concerned, is not something that we would ever recommend any of our growers to do.
Else, in my opinion, is overkill. Topping your plants, mainlining your plants. There's too much recovery time in that. Why not use the plant that you have rather than removing some to create more surface area? On the video that I created that said stop topping your plants, the main argument people had was, well, if you don't top your plants, you're not maximizing plant growth. To which I argue that's incorrect. You can bend your plants over to get maximized growth. You don't have to top them. Keep the tops, utilize them, and keep it growing on. I think between these two techniques, any grower can grow great product. Don't let it bring you down. Don't overcomplicate the situation. Make it simple for you. And I think that will allow you to keep your garden as efficient as possible. Do we get it?
All right, guys, I think that this is about it for this video here. Props to Pigeons 420 for educating people in the cannabis space. The low stress training, the bending, and the lollipopping are great techniques. However, where we would come in here and say, don't just do those. Do add your topping, do add your veg stage defoliation, do add the support of your buds during the flowering stage. And the one thing that we would recommend removing is that twisting. Well, what he's saying here is that it stresses your plant to top, but it also stresses your plant a lot more to do the bending and the twisting of those branches all the time. So if you want your plants to get some resilience on those branches, the best way to do that is by putting a fan around them so that the airflow is going to keep moving those branches around. And that in itself is going to strengthen them. That's it for today's bud review. I hope you guys could learn a thing or two. Until the next time, if you like this content, please hit the like button. If you want to see this again, please hit subscribe. And until the next one, happy growing. What was it that you laughed? What did I do?